I feel like we've gotten worse at devlogs.
Oh yeah, like I don't understand. We haven't gotten any better and probably got worse. Hey guys, welcome back. It is devlog number 4. Um, well, 5 if you count 0. Uh, and we're going to be talking about game mechanics and the start of how we do our like enemy kingdoms and how they're programmed to like build their own kingdoms alongside you.
All right,
Fog.
what is that you see in the distance? It's nothing because we have fog of war in our game. Now, what is fog of war? Go.
That was the dumbest thing you have possibly ever said. Alright, so how we did Fog of War. It was pretty easy, pretty straightforward. All we did was put a layer of polygons of fog right over the map. And as you place buildings, if the building is close enough to a fog tile, it'll remove it. And the same thing goes for if you move soldiers around, it'll slowly start to remove the fog so your soldiers are able to see what's around them. And then the opposite thing happens if you remove soldiers from an area or if you remove buildings from an area, it'll just put the fog back to how it was and you're no longer able to see what's on those tiles. So, how we did the daylight cycle. It's done through just changing the light, obviously. What we do is we dim it during the night just a tad and we turn it to like a bluer color. And this is just to simulate time in the game. So rather than doing seasons, we wanted to just do like night and day. And it looks pretty great. Some of the little houses have little lanterns that turn on at the night and then they turn off during the day. So yeah, here's a piece of code for how it works. Super straightforward. Yeah. All right, Bass?
Give me a good pitch.
All right, give us the scoop on the research. How was it done?
All right, it's done. You start off by choosing one of the 5 core topics. Through that, you learn how to build new buildings, create new create new armor, create new weapons. If you get a library, you can then start researching more topics at once. So 2 ways of going about it are you either go straight from the military and go straight to conquering other civilizations, or you go for the research path and you try and research as many topics so you're better off in the long run.
Okay, so the reason we talked about all those different mechanics is because all of those same mechanics are then used for the CPU kingdoms. That's just the name we're giving the enemy kingdoms because they're not technically always your enemies, as you can ally them or make them neutral. So we wanted to talk about those mechanics, so now we can talk about how we've started implementing logic for the kingdoms to build themselves. Alright, so when you start a game, you can pick how many kingdoms you want in your game. And then we actually use Lloyd relaxation to scatter the kingdoms all across the map. If you don't know what that is, we mentioned it in the previous... 2 videos ago. We mentioned it. It's a super fun algorithm that just kind of spreads out randomized points to make them less clumped. And we use that to then place the kingdoms, and from there they start building their civilizations.
All right. The CPU kingdom names are randomly generated from a list of real medieval kingdoms, and then they're given a banner color depending on the 10 available banners. It just randomly selects one as you add kingdoms.
Okay, so first CPU kingdom thing we wanted to talk about was how they research. We're actually going to do a later video on like the really complicated components of the CPU kingdoms, and that's going to include a lot of the later game researching and combat. But in this one, we're going to talk about how they start researching and they start building. And it's done through a preset list for researching. All that means is we have a bunch of predefined arrays. They're all about 10 researches long, and when the kingdom has a specific style or playing style, it's going to pick that preset list of researches, and no matter what, those are going to be the first 10 things that it decides to research. And the reason we did this is because if they all just started at the same place and then tried to research in their own way, they would just all end up going in very similar routes to get all the stuff on the tech tree. But this way we're able to get them going in crazy different directions, and it should add a lot more randomness to the game itself. Okay, so the building for CPU kingdoms is a lot more complicated than the research. The first thing, so it happens in 2 steps. First, it figures out what building it wants to build and if it can even build it. And then it figures out if it can be placed somewhere and where to place it. And the best place to start with this is the walls, actually. So the walls are built depending on the kingdom's playing style pretty early on. It'll try and build, its first set of walls around its keep. And how we do this is we place a collider that's not visible to the player at all, but it's going to be where that kingdom wants to put its walls. And then it's also going to calculate where it wants its secondary wall to go, because most of the kingdoms want a secondary outer wall to happen. It all depends on the kingdom, though. And it's just going to put colliders all around the kingdom, just so that it knows it shouldn't place buildings there. And it's worth noting, like, other kingdoms wouldn't be able to place buildings because they're too close to an existing building already of another kingdom. Anyway, from that point, it's going to start placing buildings that the kingdom thinks it needs, and that's where we get into calculating what is the next building selection. So how that's going to work is all it does is it goes through a giant if stack of different possibilities. They're all in an order based off of its playing style. So most of the primary stuff is in the same order for every kingdom. For example, they're all going to need dwellings when they're low on population. They're all going to need log huts and mines if they don't have any. And when they try to figure out where to place them, what they do is they try and go in a circle around their keep, trying different radiuses to place their buildings. The reason we didn't use a square instead of a circle is because if we end up using a square, all the buildings look like they're perfectly placed, even when we give them random rotation. But if we do a circle, it looks like they're more scattered, and it looks like the city's being built in a more organic way. And you can see, from the images on here, just kind of how that works. It looks a lot more complicated than it is, but it gives us these nice cities where everything is very well put together, and yeah, that's about it.
Thank you for watching. Next time we'll be covering the basics of the mechanics of combat. We'll see you later.